But then also we've had revelations going all the way back to September related to a Spanish security company called UC Global, Undercover Global, which it was passing along intelligence, or it was engaged in a spying operation against Julian Assange and journalists and his lawyers and visitors to the Ecuador embassy, and passing that information along to the U.S. intelligence agencies. Specifically, we believe it was the CIA, and that this company was involved in a massive espionage operation to which right now Julian Assange and his legal team have a case in Spain where they have sued and accused David Morales, the CEO of this company, of being involved in crimes against Julian Assange. This came out in the extradition hearing. The attorneys actually spent quite a bit of time on this during their argument. And so David Morales, he took a trip to Las Vegas, Nevada, and this was around, I want to say, 2018. And in 2018, so 2, maybe 3 years ago, he came to the United States. He met with, or he got a contract while he was at a trade fair, in a security trade fair in Las Vegas. And it was a contract to do private security for Sheldon Adelson's yachts. And Sheldon, most people will know as this major bankroller of Republicans to President Donald Trump. And while he was in the, as his defense attorneys understand, he also, David Morales, inked some kind of an agreement with U.S. intelligence agency to engage in the spying operation against Julian Assange. So he returned to Spain and he began that work. And politically, we also need to understand that there was a changing of leadership in Ecuador. No longer Rafael Correa. It was now Lenin Moreno who was the president of Ecuador. And they wanted to be more friendly with the U.S. government. They were not willing to be as adversarial. And Moreno has proven to be much more of a right-wing president, very different from the left-wing Rafael Correa.
And there was some deal that was made with the U.S. right before all this happened too, right? A few months before.
Involved, I think it involved a loan, or having access to an IMF loan or something like that, that opened it up to that. So there's evidence that there was some deal making with the United States government around handing over Assange. And so essentially, after Moreno was elected, you have a pressure campaign that grew and intensified against Julian Assange while he was in this embassy. And they started looking at people who came to the embassy who were Americans, who were Russians, who were journalists, people who came to visit him. Anyone who was there could be potentially targeted. They had microphones planted, and as it was described, every 14 days, I believe it was, they would take those microphones and they'd upload them to servers, and U.S. intelligence agencies would have access to those servers. They were UC Global servers, but the U.S. intelligence analysts had access to these materials. And as you say, they were in the bathroom, hiding out. Julian Assange knew he was under watch. He thought if he went to the women's bathroom, he might be able to escape some of this surveillance, but actually didn't matter because they had also planted bugs inside of the women's bathroom. And one thing we learned is that, and I believe this actually happened, but one thing we learned is that there were conversations within the agency, and there are a couple of whistleblowers who are going to testify during this upcoming extradition hearing about UC Global. And what we heard is that they were talking about trying to kidnap Julian Assange. Basically, what they would do is they'd leave the door open to the embassy, and it would be like, "Oops, we're sorry, we made a mistake." But then agents would be able to just swoop in and carry Julian Assange out of the embassy and kidnap him. That was one thing that was talked about. They talked about poisoning him. To me, this harkens back to the way the CIA came up with a lot of different ideas and methods for carrying out hit jobs against Fidel Castro when he was president of Cuba. It just reminds me of this sort of thing from back then in the anti-communist days. And so this is really significant because it targeted journalists explicitly. I'll add that when they were taking people's phones, so everyone who came into the embassy came in with their bags, they came in with their electronic devices. Those were inspected. The people at the embassy would hold on to these devices. There's evidence and documentation that shows that those phones were being pulled apart, that there was efforts to try to plant tracking devices on there, or malware, ways that they could continue to follow these journalists after they were done visiting the embassy. There's one journalist, Ellen Nakashima, at the Washington Post, where they actually talk about how they wanted to take her phone battery, but as she was leaving the embassy, she realized that her phone battery was missing. And so the guy wrote down that, I wanted to keep it, but she came back to me and I had no choice. I had to give her phone battery, which is a really amazing thing to actually memorialize in writing when you think about it, because eventually this stuff's going to get out. People are going to find out that you were engaged in this kind of surveillance against journalists. And I'll just remind people that the CIA has a pretty good history of targeting journalists that goes back to the 1960s, 1970s. It caused them a lot of problems. It led to committee hearings within Congress. And it seems like a lot of that has fallen by the wayside. Whatever was holding them back over the last 2 to 3 decades, it seems like with Julian Assange, none of that matters because they were willing to engage in this operation against Julian Assange.